Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku wielded Mjolnir as the worthy hero of Midgard. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Cementos' private training ground, colloquially known as Gamma Gym, was thick with the metallic tang of sweat and the sharp, almost electric scent of ozone left in the wake of Izuku Midoriya's power. Each ragged breath he took was a testament to his exertion, a desperate gasp for air in a self-imposed crucible. The gym was a concrete labyrinth, a brittlest landscape of towers, pillars, and jagged platforms designed to push a student's quirk and mobility to their absolute limits. For Izuku, it was a sanctuary and a torture chamber all in one. He stood on a teetering monolith of concrete, his legs trembling not from the precarious perch, but from pure, unadulterated exhaustion. His gym uniform was soaked through, clinging to his wiry frame like a second skin. Scars, old and new, crisscrossed his arms, a road map of his painful journey with One for All. More. I have to do more. The thought was a constant, unforgiving drumbeat in his skull. It was the echo of All Might's final, heroic stand. It was the ghost of his mentor's words, spoken with a pointed finger and a blood-stained smile. You're next. Weeks had passed since the Battle of Kamino. Weeks since the world had watched its symbol of peace wither into a skeletal man, his power extinguished like a dying star. In those weeks, the weight of that legacy had settled onto Izuku's shoulders, a crushing, invisible mantle that felt heavier than any concrete slab in this gym. He was the ninth wielder, the chosen one, the secret heir to a sacred torch. And he felt, in every aching fiber of his being, like a fraud. He could only manage 8% of One for All consistently now. 8%. It felt like a pathetic insult to the cataclysmic power All Might had once wielded. It was a flickering candle trying to replace a lighthouse. The gap between what he was and what he needed to be was a chasm so vast he feared he would fall into it, and never be seen again. Again, he grit out, his voice a raw rasp. He crouched, green lightning crackling around him, tracing the veins of his suit. The power of One for All thrummed under his skin, a wild, untamed beast that he held on the barest of leashes. He channeled it into his legs, the familiar, semi-controlled burn a welcome distraction from the spiraling thoughts. He leaped. The air rushed past him, a high-pitched whistle in his ears. He soared across a 50-meter gap, aiming for a narrow pillar on the other side. Mid-air, he twisted his body, preparing for the impact. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. He kicked out, not at an enemy, but at the air, using the force to adjust his trajectory. He landed hard. His ankles screamed in protest, but they held. No brakes. A small victory. He didn't give himself a moment to celebrate. He immediately launched himself again, ricocheting from wall to pillar to platform in a chaotic, lightning green blur. His movements were getting sloppier, his controls slipping. He knew it. Aizawa-sensei would have had him wrapped in his capture weapon and suspended from the ceiling for such recklessness. But Aizawa wasn't here. Only the ghosts were. The ghost of All Might's power. The ghost of Sir Nightai's prophecy, a future he was still running from. The ghost of his own quirkless past, whispering that he was just a boy playing dress-up in a giant's armor. He landed on a wide plaza in the center of the gym, stumbling to his knees. His lungs were on fire. Black spots danced in his vision. He could feel the vestiges within him, a silent, watchful audience. He imagined Nana Shimura, her kind smile tinged with expectation. He imagined the others, a long line of heroes whose power now resided in him, judging his every move. You're next. The words weren't a promise anymore. They were a condemnation. It was then that the world seemed to hold its breath. First came the light. A brilliant, impossibly bright streak that tore across the late afternoon sky, visible even through the reinforced skylights of the gym. It was faster than a plane, brighter than any firework. For a split second, it painted the concrete landscape in hues of stark white and electric blue. Izuku, on his hands and knees, looked up, his green eyes wide with a mixture of awe and alarm. Then came the sound. Not an explosion, but a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very foundation of the building. It wasn't the chaotic boom of a villain's attack. It was a pure, directional tone, like a celestial tuning fork had been struck against the edge of the world. The concrete beneath his palms trembled. A fine layer of dust sifted down from the ceiling. His hero instincts, honed by fire and blood, screamed at him. Villain attack? A new weapon? He scrambled to his feet, every muscle protesting, and bolted for the gym's exit. As he burst out into the open air of the campus grounds, he saw he wasn't alone. Other students were spilling out of the main building and the Heights Alliance dorms, their faces a mixture of confusion and excitement. "Whoa, did you guys see that?" Kirishima yelled, his red hair seeming to bristle with energy. He was already half-hardening his arm out of habit. "That was so manly! It looked like a shooting star on steroids." "It was not a shooting star," Ida Tenya declared, his hands chopping the air with educational authority. He had already activated the emergency protocols app on his phone. Its trajectory was too steep, and it maintained its luminosity upon atmospheric entry. It was likely an uncontrolled satellite deorbit or, more concerningly, an object of extraterrestrial origin. Uraraka Achiko ran up to Izuku, her round face etched with worry. "Deku-kun! Are you okay? You look exhausted. You were training again, weren't you?" He could only nod, his chest still heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His eyes were locked on the plume of smoke and dust rising from the forested hills on the outskirts of Mizurufu, a few miles from the UA campus. The campus-wide alarms began to blare, a familiar and unwelcome sound. Aizawa's voice, flat and tired, crackled over the intercom. "All students are to return to the Heights Alliance dormitories immediately. This is not a drill. A perimeter is being established. Stay inside until the all-clear is given." A collective groan went through the student body, but they complied. As Izuku was herded back toward the dorms by a frantic Ida, his gaze met Katsuki Bakugo's across the courtyard. Bakugo wasn't looking at the sky. He was glaring directly at Izuku, a complex expression of anger and something else, twisting his features. He knew Izuku had been pushing himself to the breaking point. The glare seemed to say, "Whatever that is, don't even think about it, you damn nerd." Izuku looked away, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. For the next hour, Class 1A was glued to the common room television. The news was in a frenzy. Helicopters were already circling the impact site. The initial reports were chaotic. "A suspected meteor strike," one reporter said breathlessly. "No, we're being told it may be a piece of villain tech," another countered. The official statements from the Hero Public Safety Commission were bland and noncommittal, urging calm and promising a thorough investigation. Izuku sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting. Every fiber of his being wanted to be out there. Not to fight, necessarily, but to help. To know. To analyze. It was an insatiable, obsessive itch that had defined him his entire life. He felt like a caged animal, pacing the confines of the dorm while the world-changing event happened just over the horizon. "They're saying the object was surprisingly small," Momo Yayarosa noted, her brow furrowed in concentration as she absorbed the data from the news report. "Given the energy signature of its descent, for it to remain intact suggests a material of impossible density and heat resistance. Maybe it's from space," Mina Ashido chirped, bouncing on her feet. "Like a real alien thing. How cool would that be?" "It would be a potential biohazard and a diplomatic nightmare," Ida corrected sternly, though his own curiosity was palpable. The first images from the ground came in. A news chopper, flying dangerously close, broadcast a live feed. In the heart of a dense, forested park area was a crater. It wasn't the messy, blasted-out hole one would expect. It was a near-perfect circle, about 30 feet in diameter. The ground around it wasn't scorched. Instead, the rock and earth seemed to have been melted and reformed into a smooth, glassy black substance. And in the very center, there was something. The camera zoomed in, the image shaky. It was small, metallic, and partially embedded in the crater's floor. It looked like a hammer. An old, ornate war hammer. The room fell silent. "A hammer?" Kaminari said, breaking the silence. "All that fuss, for a hammer?" But Izuku saw more. He leaned forward, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive, his muttering starting up under his breath without his permission. "No, look at the design, it's not modern. It looks ancient, almost Norse in its engraving. And there's no damage. It fell from orbit, hit the ground with enough force to liquefy rock, and there isn't a scratch on it. The handle is short, wrapped in leather. Is that a thawing at the end? It's not a construction tool. It's a weapon. But who would use something like that? And how did it get here? Was it thrown? From space? That's impossible. The velocity would be. Deku, you're doing it again, Uraraka said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. He snapped his mouth shut, blushing. But his mind was already gone, lost in a spiral of 1,000 questions. An irresistible pull, stronger than his exhaustion, stronger than Aizawa's orders, began to tug at him. It was a feeling deep in his gut, a hum of curiosity so profound it felt like a physical force. He had to see it. Night fell. The authorities had cordoned off a 2-mile radius around the crater. The news had shifted from frantic speculation to a slow, simmering watch. Pro-heroes had arrived on the scene, turning the area into a fortress of flashing lights and stern-faced sidekicks. Izuku waited until the dorm was quiet, until the last of his classmates had turned in. Ida had done a final, diligent headcount before retiring, satisfied that everyone was safe and accounted for. Izuku had feigned sleepiness, his heart thumping a guilty rhythm against his ribs. Slipping out was easier than he expected. A window left open on the ground floor, a quick dash across the manicured lawn, and he was swallowed by the shadows of the campus perimeter. He was breaking a dozen rules, risking suspension, and betraying the trust of his teachers. He knew it. But the pull was undeniable. He activated one for all at a meager 3%, just enough to add a silent spring to his step and turn his brisk walk into a ground-eating lope. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the stuffy confines of the dorm. He followed the glow of the floodlights in the distance, his path taking him through the darkened, sleeping streets of Muzurifu and into the woods. As he got closer, the sounds of civilization faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. He bypassed the official blockade easily, his small stature and stealth training allowing him to slip through the cordon of police tape and tired-looking officers like a ghost. He felt a pang of guilt for deceiving them, but it was quickly overridden by the magnetic sense of purpose that drew him forward. He found a vantage point on a rocky outcrop overlooking the crater, hiding himself within a thicket of overgrown bushes. The scene below was a surreal blend of the mundane and the mythic. Portable floodlights cast long, dancing shadows, bathing the crater in a harsh, artificial glare. A perimeter of heroes stood guard. He recognized several of them, the stoic Kamui Woods, the formidable Ryukyu, and the ever-present Death Arms. And then he saw him. The new #1 hero, Endeavor, stood at the edge of the crater, his arms crossed over his massive chest. His flame beard cast a hellish, flickering orange light on his perpetually furious face. He radiated an aura of impatient, barely contained power. This is a waste of time. Endeavor's voice boomed, easily carrying up to Izuku's hiding spot. The Commission wants it moved to a secure lab for analysis. Let's get it done. We've tried, sir, a sidekick said nervously. It won't move, Endeavor scoffed, a sound like grinding rocks. He strode into the crater, his heavy boots crunching on the vitrified ground. He loomed over the hammer, a titan of fire and fury staring down at a simple, ancient tool. With a grunt, he bent down and wrapped his massive hands around the hammer's head. He pulled. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched, cording into thick ropes of sinew. A low growl of effort escaped his lips. His face contorted, turning a shade of purplish red under his mask of fire. The hammer did not move. It didn't shift, it didn't scrape, it didn't budge a single, infinitesimal millimeter. It was as if he were trying to pull the planet itself from its orbit. Izuku watched, breathless. Endeavor was a man whose raw physical strength was second only to All Might's in his prime. If he couldn't lift it, what could? With a roar of frustration, Endeavor let go. Insolent piece of scrap! He took a step back, and his body erupted in flames. If it will not move, I will melt the ground around it! He unleashed a concentrated blast of his hell flame, a jet of incandescent plasma that slammed into the ground at the base of the hammer. The vitrified rock around it glowed white-hot, beginning to bubble and liquefy under the intense heat that Izuku could feel even from his hiding place. The air shimmered with the thermal distortion, yet the hammer remained untouched. It sat in the heart of the inferno, its dark uru metal and leather-wrapped handle not even singed. It didn't glow. It didn't heat up. It remained cool, dark, and utterly indifferent to the fury of the number one hero. After a solid minute of sustained fire, Endeavor stopped, panting heavily. The hammer was still there, perfectly embedded, looking as if it had just been placed. The molten rock around it began to cool and harden once more. The silence that followed was deafening. The assembled heroes and sidekicks stared, their professional bravado completely shattered. This was not a problem of physics. This was something else. Ryukyu, in her massive dragon form, was next. She tried to pry it loose with a claw the size of a small car. The claw scraped and screeched against the hammer's head, but the metal wouldn't even scratch, and the object remained fixed. Death Arms used his quirk to try and punch the ground beside it, hoping to dislodge it with concussive force. The ground cracked, but the hammer didn't tremble. It became a spectacle. A challenge. One by one, heroes tried their luck, their quirks, their strength. Nothing worked. The media, watching from their helicopters, had a field day. The unmovable hammer of Muzurifu became an instant legend. Hours passed. The energy at the site slowly dissipated, replaced by a collective sense of frustration and fatigue. Eventually, under the direction of a weary-looking Tsukachi, the lead detective, most of the heroes began to pull back, leaving a smaller, skeletal crew to guard the site overnight. Endeavor left in a huff, his departure marked by a furious blast of flames that shot him into the night sky. The crater was quiet now, save for the hum of the generators powering the floodlights. The remaining guards were stationed at the perimeter, their attention wandering. This was his chance. Izuku didn't know why he was doing it. His rational mind screamed at him to leave, to go back to the dorm and forget he ever saw this. But the pull was still there, stronger than ever. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt personal. Like a song only he could hear, a quiet invitation. He slipped from his hiding place, his movements silent as a whisper. He kept to the shadows, his small frame making him nearly invisible. He reached the edge of the crater, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the smooth, dark ground. The air inside the crater felt different. Still. Heavy with an unspoken energy, like the moment before a lightning strike. The hum he'd been feeling in his gut intensified, resonating with the very air around him. All eyes were facing outward, scanning the forest. No one saw the small, green-haired boy walk towards the center of Japan's newest, most bizarre mystery. He stood before the hammer. Up close, it was both smaller and more intimidating than it had appeared on camera. The head was a solid block of dark, grayish metal, etched with fine, swirling lines that seemed to move in the corner of his eye. It was scarred and pitted from countless battles, a silent testament to a violent history. The short, sturdy handle was wrapped in well-worn brown leather, and a simple leather loop hung from the pommel. It radiated an aura of immense age and power, a quiet, slumbering strength that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. "What am I doing?" he thought, a wave of his familiar self-doubt washing over him. Endeavor couldn't move it. Ryukyu couldn't move it. I can barely handle 8% of One for All. My arm will probably shatter just from touching it. He thought of all the reasons he was unworthy. He was a crybaby. A clumsy fanboy who broke his own body. He was constantly terrified, constantly second-guessing himself. He wasn't a pillar of strength like All Might. He was just Izuku Midoriya, the boy who was born wrong in a world of wonders. He reached a trembling hand out, then stopped, his fingers hovering inches from the leather grip. Why did he want to be a hero? The question bloomed in his mind clear as a bell. It cut through the fear and the doubt. For a moment, he wasn't thinking about All Might's legacy or the pressure of One for All. He was thinking about his core, his origin. Endeavor had tried to move the hammer with rage and a desire to assert his dominance. The other heroes had tried with their power, a tool to solve a problem. They saw it as an obstacle, an object. Izuku looked at the hammer, and he didn't feel the need to conquer it. He just understood it. Or felt like he was on the verge of understanding it. He thought back to the sludge villain, to running in when his legs moved on their own to save Kaken. He thought of his mother, crying and apologizing that he was quirkless. He thought of All Might on that rooftop, telling him he could be a hero. He thought of the look on Kota's face when he was saved. He thought of Ares' tiny hand in his. His motivation wasn't about being the strongest. It was never about that. It was about seeing a person who was scared, who was hurting, and wanting to do anything and everything in his power to make it stop. It was about the desire to save people with a smile, not just to show off his power, but to reassure them. To ease their fears. To tell them, with his very presence, it's okay now. I am here. That was his truth. That was his core. Selfless, reckless, all-consuming compassion. His trembling stopped. His resolve solidified. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to conquer the unmovable hammer. He just felt called. He reached down. His fingers, scarred from so many battles, closed around the worn leather of the grip. It felt cool to the touch, solid and real. He expected an immense, unyielding weight. He braced himself, preparing for the strain, for the inevitable failure. And then he lifted. There was no resistance. It rose from the ground as if it weighed nothing at all, as if it were a child's toy. A soft, gentle hum vibrated up his arm, a sound of greeting, of acceptance. A faint, ethereal blue light shimmered from the engraved lines on the hammer's head, casting a serene glow on his face. The light was calm, peaceful, a stark contrast to the violent green energy of One for All. Izuku Midoriya stood in the center of the crater, holding the mythical hammer in his hand. He blinked. He looked at the hammer. He looked at his hand wrapped around the grip. He looked at the empty space in the rock where it had been resting for hours, defying the strongest people on the planet. It didn't make sense. None of it. A strange energy coursed through him, flowing from the hammer into his body. It wasn't the explosive power of Ofa. It was different. It felt ancient, vast, and calm. It was the feeling of a clear sky after a storm, of immense power held in perfect, effortless control. Faint, harmless sparks of blue lightning began to crackle around the hammer's head, arcing to his knuckles and dissipating with a quiet hiss. They didn't burn. They tickled. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, bathed in the glow of the floodlights and the soft, internal light of the weapon in his hand. The weight of One for All was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden he was carrying alone. He was quirkless no more, a successor to the greatest hero, and now, this, his mind, the same one that could analyze a dozen quirks in a matter of seconds, was utterly, completely blank. He had only one, single, overwhelming thought that echoed in the sudden silence of his soul. What is this? The journey back to the Heights Alliance dormitory was a blur of paranoid terror. Every rustle of leaves was a pro-hero closing in. Every distant siren was for him. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had a panic attack just thinking about breaking a minor school rule, had just committed what felt like a dozen felonies. He had broken a federally mandated curfew, crossed a police and hero-enforced cordon, tampered with what was effectively evidence in a national security investigation, and stolen the object of that investigation. The hammer, he still couldn't process it, was clutched in his right hand. It felt no heavier than a textbook, its balance so perfect it seemed to defy physics. Yet, its presence was as loud as a scream in the quiet of the night. He half expected it to start glowing and give away his position. He slipped back through the ground floor window he'd left ajar, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The common room was dark and silent, filled with the slumbering shapes of his classmates on the couches, having fallen asleep watching the news. He tiptoed past them, his breath held tight in his chest, his every step a calculated risk. The floorboard under the rug near the kitchen creaked, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. On the couch, Kirishima mumbled something about manly hammers in his sleep and rolled over. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice, before scurrying up the stairs to the boy's wing. He practically fell through the door of his room, shutting it with a soft click and leaning his back against it, his body trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline, exhaustion, and sheer, unadulterated panic. His room, his sanctuary, his shrine to All Might, suddenly felt too small, too confining for the cosmic secret he now harbored. He looked at the hammer in his hand. The faint blue light in its engravings had faded, leaving it a block of dark, unassuming metal. He gently placed it on his desk, next to a stack of hero analysis notebooks. It made a soft, solid thunk. The sound seemed to echo the finality of his actions. It was here. In his room. Now what? Okay, think. He whispered to himself, beginning to pace the small space, his hands flying to his hair as his signature muttering began to bubble up. I have what is possibly an alien artifact or an ancient mythological weapon of unknown origin in my dorm room at Japan's top hero school. This is bad. This is so bad. This is beyond bad. This is, cataclysmically, career-endingly, get expelled and possibly arrested for interfering with a national security level incident bad. What do I do? I can't tell anyone. Who would I even tell? Hi, Aizawa-sensei, sorry to bother you, but I stole the unmovable hammer that Endeavor couldn't budge. My bad. He'd expel me on the spot. He'd use his quirk and his capture weapon and I'd be dangling from the ceiling before I could even explain. He stopped pacing and stared at the hammer. It just sat there, impassive. He now had two secrets, each one capable of turning the world on its head. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him by the greatest hero of all time. And this hammer. The burden of one for all was a known quantity, a crushing weight of expectation and history. This new secret was a terrifying unknown, a question mark forged in celestial fire. He reached out a hesitant finger and poked it. It was cool to the touch, solid and unyielding. The sense of calm power he'd felt in the crater was still there, a faint undercurrent beneath his panic. He felt a strange impulse, a flicker of curiosity amidst the fear. What could it do? He had lifted it, but what did that mean? He wrapped his hand around the leather grip again. The connection was instantaneous, a subtle hum of energy flowing into his arm. It felt right. Natural. He thought about the sparks he'd seen earlier, the gentle blue lightning. Could he do that again? He focused, not on the wild, explosive energy of one for all, but on the quiet, deep well of power he felt within the hammer. He pictured a small spark, just a little one, like static electricity. Crack! A bolt of brilliant blue lightning, far larger and louder than he'd intended, leaped from the head of the hammer. It wasn't a spark, it was a miniature thunderbolt. It shot across his room and slammed directly into the centerpiece of his All Might collection, a life-sized poster of the symbol of peace in his prime, smiling his signature, reassuring smile. The poster erupted in a localized flash of light. The smell of ozone and burnt paper filled the room. When the light faded, a blackened, fist-size hole marred the center of the poster, right over All Might's iconic smile. The edges of the hole were scorched and still smoking faintly. Izuku stared, horrified. He had desecrated his own shrine. He had shot lightning at All Might's face. The panic returned with a vengeance. He quickly let go of the hammer as if it were red-hot. This was too much. This was a power he couldn't control, a secret he couldn't keep. He was in over his head, drowning in a sea of his own terrible decisions. He needed help. He needed a mentor. There was only one person he could possibly turn to. Toshinori Yagi was not used to sleeping well. Years of fighting on the front lines, followed by the constant pain of his injury, had turned him into a habitual insomniac. So when a frantic, pebble-like tapping sounded at his window at nearly 2 a.m, he was wide awake, sipping a cup of lukewarm tea and grading first-year essays. His apartment, located on the UA campus for security reasons, was on the 3rd floor. He sighed, expecting it to be a particularly ambitious cat. He shuffled to the window and pulled back the curtain, his tired eyes widening in shock. Clinging to the brickwork outside his window was his successor, Izuku Midoriya. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and he was clutching a large, dark object to his chest like a life raft. Young Midoriya? Toshinori hissed, fumbling with the lock and sliding the window open. What in the world are you doing? You'll fall! I need to talk to you. Izuku squeaked, scrambling inside and stumbling onto the floor. He was still in his gym clothes, smudged with dirt and smelling faintly of burnt paper. He held the object out with trembling hands. It's about the hammer, Toshinori stared. It was unmistakably the hammer from the news. The Anchor of Muzutafu, as one particularly dramatic newscaster had dubbed it. It was supposed to be in a crater, surrounded by heroes. Instead, it was here, in his apartment, in the hands of his student. I can explain. Izuku began, the words tumbling out of him in a frantic, jumbled rush. I saw it crash, and I felt this pull, and I know I broke the rules. I broke so many rules, but I had to see it, and Endeavor couldn't lift it, and no one could. But then I went down there and I just thought about why I wanted to be a hero, and then, it let me. Toshinori held up a hand, a gesture that was far less grand but just as effective as it had been in his muscle form. Slow down, my boy. Breathe. He guided the trembling teenager to a chair. Izuku carefully placed the hammer on the floor between his feet. Toshinori looked from the boy to the hammer and back again, his mind struggling to connect the dots. He had seen the news. He had seen the raw power of the number one hero fail to move it. You lifted this? Toshinori asked, his voice a quiet rasp of disbelief. For an answer, Izuku simply reached down, wrapped his hand around the grip, and lifted the hammer as if it were made of styrofoam. He held it up, the faint light from the street casting long shadows from its blocky head. Toshinori felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he'd first learned the true history of One for All, utter, world-tilting bewilderment. He was a man who had punched mountains and changed the weather with his fists. He understood power. But this was something alien. He leaned forward, his skeletal frame creaking. May I? Izuku nodded and placed the hammer back on the floor. Toshinori knelt, his joints protesting. He looked at the hammer, this inert, impossible object. He had spent his life defined by his strength. Even in this withered form, he still possessed a sliver of Oafei's power. He gripped the leather handle. It was cool and solid beneath his bony fingers. He pulled. It was like trying to lift the building. It was like trying to lift the very ground the building stood upon. There was no give. No sense of weight, even. It was simply absolute. It was not heavy. It was immovable. He strained, a wheezing grunt escaping his lips, the muscles in his thin arm trembling with the effort. Nothing. It was less responsive than stone. He sat back on his heels, panting slightly, and stared at his successor. The boy who could barely handle a tenth of his power had just lifted this object with no effort at all. Incredible! Toshinori breathed. He looked at Izuku, his eyes filled with a dawning understanding. The hammer. It didn't yield to power. It yielded to you. They spent the next hour talking, their voices low. Izuku recounted the entire story, from the pull he felt to the disastrous lightning bolt in his room. Toshinori listened patiently, his sharp mind analyzing every detail, trying to fit this impossible event into the framework of their world. Could it be a second quirk? Izuku asked, his voice filled with a desperate hope for a logical explanation. Maybe One for All unlocks something? A latent ability? Toshinori shook his head, his long blonde bangs falling into his face. I do not believe so, young Midoriya. One for All is a quirk that stockpiles power and passes on the vestiges of its previous users. It has never, in all its history, manifested the ability to create, or summon, physical artifacts. This is not a part of One for All. Then, a support item? Izuku offered. Perhaps. Toshinori mused, his gaze fixed on the hammer. A support item with a bizarre and incredibly specific activation requirement. Not biometrics, not a voice command, but a moral component, a lock that only opens for a certain character type? The technology required would be beyond anything I have ever seen. It would be more advanced than Island's greatest creations. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I must be honest with you, my boy. I do not know what this is. This is beyond my experience. It's beyond anyone's experience. Izuku's face fell. If All Might didn't have the answer, who would? Toshinori saw the despair on his successor's face and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. But I do know this, he said, his voice firm. Whatever this power is, whatever its origin, it chose you, just as I chose you. It must have seen the same thing I saw on that day with the sludge villain. It saw a true hero's heart. A heart willing to sacrifice itself for others without a moment's hesitation. He squeezed Izuku's shoulder gently. For now, this must remain our secret. Yours and mine. The world is not ready for this. You are not ready for this. You cannot control it, and a power you cannot control is a danger to yourself and others. We must be cautious. You must learn what it is, what it can do, in secret. Understand it before you ever think of revealing it. The target on your back is already immense because of One for All. We cannot afford to paint another one on it. Izuku nodded, the words sinking in. Caution. Secrecy. Understanding. It felt like the early days of training with One for all over again, but this time, even his mentor was in the dark. The next day, the unmovable hammer of Muzutafu was the only thing anyone was talking about. The crater had become a bizarre tourist attraction. The news showed live footage of a long line of people, civilians, low-ranking heroes, attention seekers, all waiting for their chance to try and lift the mysterious object. In the 1A common room, the television was on, displaying the strange spectacle. This is ridiculous, Aizawa grumbled, sipping from his coffee pouch as he watched the screen. It's a public nuisance, but it's so exciting, Mina cheered. It's like something out of an old myth. The hammer and the stone. A news segment cut to a montage of failures. A man with a strength-enhancing quirk strained until the veins in his forehead bulged, then collapsed. A woman who could manipulate metal tried to use her quirk, only for her powers to slide off the hammer as if it were coated in oil. Then came the comical portion of the morning. A camera zoomed in on two familiar, small figures. If brute force doesn't work, then it must respond to sophistication and charm, Mineta declared to the camera, puffing out his chest. He sauntered up to the hammer, gave it what he presumably thought was a seductive wink, and tried to lift it. His face turned purple with effort before he gave up, muttering. Clearly it's a prude. Kaminari was next. Maybe it just needs a little jump start, he announced, placing his hands on the hammer's head. 1.3 million volts! Electricity coursed from his hands, enveloping the hammer in a crackling golden aura. The hammer, as it had with Endeavor's fire, did nothing. Kaminari, however, short-circuited spectacularly, his brain turning to mush. He stood there, thumbs up, a dopey grin on his face, whispering. Wei! The class roared with laughter. Izuku managed a weak smile, but his stomach was churning with anxiety. They were all trying to lift the hammer that was currently hidden in his closet, tucked away behind his spare gym uniforms. The laughter died down, however, when a new figure pushed his way through the crowd on screen. It was Bakugo. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't grandstanding for the cameras. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at the hammer not as a curiosity, but as a personal affront, an obstacle that dared to exist in his path to number one. Out of my way, you damn extras! He snarled, shoving people aside. He reached the hammer and stared down at it. The crowd fell silent. Even the news reporters seemed to hold their breath. Bakugo let out a guttural yell and grabbed the hammer, not by the handle, but by the solid metal head. He pulled, his entire body shaking with the raw, explosive power he contained. Nothing. Grah! He roared, and this time, he activated his quirk. A series of violent, rapid-fire explosions erupted from his palms, blasting against the hammer and the ground. The explosions were deafening, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. He was trying to use his explosions to physically jolt the hammer loose, to prove that his power could overcome any obstacle. When the dust settled, Bakugo was on his knees, panting, his palms smoking. The hammer was exactly where it had been, not even dusty. For a moment, Bakugo was utterly still. The news camera zoomed in on his face. It was a terrifyingly blank expression. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering bewilderment. He had thrown his absolute all at this thing, and it had completely and utterly ignored him. It was a rejection more profound than any loss in battle. He stood up, wordlessly, and shoved his way back through the crowd, ignoring the reporters shouting questions at him. Izuku watched, a pit forming in his stomach. He knew Bakugo. He knew that look. It was the look of a worldview being cracked. And he knew, with a dreadful certainty, that Bakugo would not let this go. That evening, Izuku found his way to one of UA's more secluded outdoor training fields, the hammer tucked away in a nondescript duffel bag. He needed to experiment, to follow All Might's advice. He needed to understand. He took the hammer out of the bag. In the fading light of dusk, it seemed to drink the shadows. He swung it a few times. The balance was uncanny. It felt like an extension of his arm, moving exactly where he willed it to go. There was no awkwardness, no unwieldy weight. He compared it to the familiar feeling of One for All. Activating full cowling at 8% felt like trying to contain a barely controlled forest fire, a constant strain against a power that wanted to tear him apart. Holding the hammer felt like holding the leash of a perfectly trained, incredibly powerful dog. It was responsive. It was obedient. It didn't hurt him. He thought about what he'd seen in movies and what he'd read in the old myths Mina had been chattering about. He looked at the hammer, then at a large rock formation 100 meters away. Can I throw it? The idea was terrifying. What if it didn't come back? What if he just threw away this cosmic artifact into the woods? But the pull, the connection, was still there. He felt a sense of trust in the weapon that he didn't fully understand. He took a deep breath, channeled a small amount of One for All into his arm for momentum, and threw the hammer with all his might. It flew through the air, not tumbling end over end, but spinning like a propeller, a silver-blue blur against the darkening sky. It slammed into the rock formation with a cataclysmic crack, shattering a huge chunk of it into gravel. Izuku's jaw dropped. The sheer destructive power was immense. He stared at the spot where it had hit, then at his empty, outstretched hand. A flicker of panic shot through him. What have I done? He waited. 1 second. 2. Nothing. His heart sank. He'd lost it. He was the universe's biggest idiot. He closed his eyes, a groan of despair escaping his lips. He thought about the hammer, about the feeling of it in his hand. He held his hand out again, a desperate, instinctual gesture. Please, he thought, come back. He felt a thrumming in the air. His eyes snapped open. The hammer was rising from the rubble. It hovered for a second, then shot back towards him, leaving a shimmering trail in the air. It wasn't a gentle arc. It was a straight line, a silver bullet homing in on his position. It was moving so fast he barely had time to brace himself. He held up his hand, and with a perfect, resounding thwack that vibrated up to his shoulder, the leather handle slapped into his palm. It didn't hurt. It just fit. He stared at it, his mind reeling. It came back. He threw it, and it came back. He could summon it. He looked at his scarred hands, the permanent reminders of the price of his first power. One for All was a legacy of pain and sacrifice, a power he had to conquer and earn through blood and broken bones. This hammer, it was a power he had been given, a gift bestowed upon him not for his strength, but for his spirit. It didn't demand a price of his body. It just asked him to be himself. As true darkness settled over the campus, Izuku found himself on the roof of the Heights Alliance building. It had become his spot for quiet contemplation, a place where he could feel close to the sky and far from the pressures on the ground. The city of Mjolnir glittered below, a sea of a million tiny lights. He held the hammer, its weight a comforting presence in his hand. He had two powers now. One, a raging green storm inside him. The other, a calm blue thunder he held in his hand. One was a secret he carried for the sake of the world. The other was a secret he kept out of fear and confusion. He looked at the weapon, at the ancient, unknowable lines etched into its surface. The feeling of being chosen was still a bewildering concept. He wasn't special. He wasn't born with anything. He was just Deku. Who are you? He whispered into the night wind, the question directed at the hammer itself. It was a plea for answers, for any kind of clarity in the whirlwind his life had become. He expected only silence. Instead, an answer came. It wasn't a sound that entered his ears. It was a word, a concept, that bloomed directly in the center of his mind. It felt impossibly old, forged in a language of thunder and starlight, and resonated with a deep, sonorous power that vibrated through his very soul. Mjolnir. Mjolnir. The name had settled into Izuku's mind like a stone into a deep well, its ripples still echoing a week later. It was more than a word. It was a brand, a designation of immense power and history. He had spent every spare moment, since that night on the roof in a feverish, clandestine research binge. His laptop became a portal to a world of myth and legend he had previously only skimmed. He devoured articles on Norse mythology, cross-referencing ancient texts and modern interpretations, his muttering driving his neighbors in the dorms to bang on his walls at all hours. Mjolnir. The legendary hammer of Thor, the Norse god of thunder. A weapon said to be capable of leveling mountains and summoning the storm. Forged in the heart of a dying star by dwarven smiths, it was the stuff of fantasy, of bedtime stories and video games. And it was currently wrapped in an old All Might-themed beach towel and hidden at the bottom of his laundry basket. The sheer absurdity threatened to overwhelm him. He, Izuku Midoriya, was the wielder of a divine weapon from a forgotten religion. It was a secret so monumental, so reality-bending, that One for All almost seemed mundane in comparison. All Might had advised caution and secrecy, and Izuku had taken the advice to heart. Mjolnir, he still felt a jolt every time he thought the name, was a power he didn't understand and hadn't earned through his own effort. It felt like a cheat code, and so, he made a decision. A stubborn, prideful, and deeply Izuku-like decision. He would not rely on it. He had to prove to himself, and to the ghost of All Might's expectations, that he could master the power he was meant to have. One for All was his legacy, his responsibility. Mjolnir was an anomaly, a spectacular, terrifying, and awe-inspiring anomaly, but an anomaly nonetheless. He needed to improve his 8%, to push for 10%, to become a hero worthy of the 9th spot in the lineage. He couldn't do that if he had a magic hammer solving all his problems. This conviction was at the forefront of his mind as Class 1A and 1B boarded the bus for their joint training exercise. The destination, a sprawling, UA-owned facility colloquially known as the Set. It was a massive, fully functional replica of a city district, currently configured to be an exact copy of Hosa's city, the site of their harrowing encounter with the hero killer, Stain. The air on the bus was thick with competitive energy. Class 1B, led by the boisterous Nito Monoma, was practically vibrating with their desire to finally put Class 1A in their place. "Oh, so 1A is gracing us with their presence?" Monoma sneered, leaning over his seat. "I'm surprised you all could make it. What with the constant villain attacks and media frenzies that seem to follow you like lost puppies. One might think you're cursed." Kendo chopped him on the back of the neck, and he slumped over with a gurgle. "Sorry about him," she said with an apologetic smile. "He's excited." Izuku barely registered the banter. He stared out the window, his gaze distant. His hands resting on his knees were clenched into tight fists. He could feel the familiar, anxious thrum of One for All under his skin, a caged beast waiting for release. He had purposefully, painfully, left Mjolnir in his room. The decision felt both right and terrifyingly wrong, like leaving a part of himself behind. Aizawa and Vlad King, the homeroom teachers for 1A and 1B respectively, stood before the assembled students at the entrance to the Hosa replica. The cityscape was eerily accurate, from the narrow alleyways where Izuku had fought Stain to the towering skyscrapers that scraped the artificial sky of the dome. "All right, listen up," Aizawa said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "This is a two-part exercise. Rescue and villain apprehension. Your class will be split. Half of you will be heroes, the other half civilians in distress. There will also be teachers playing the role of villains. Your objective is to rescue the civilians and subdue the villains in the most efficient manner possible. Standard hero protocols apply. Minimize property damage. Prioritize civilian safety. Communication is key." Vlad King took over, a fang-bearing grin on his face. "The villains will not be holding back. Treat this as a real-world scenario. The team with the highest score in rescue points and villain capture time wins. And 1B will be the ones winning." The teams were announced. Izuku was placed on a hero team with Ida, Uraraka, Tokoemi, and to his internal groan, Monoma, who had been assigned to their squad to promote cross-class cooperation. Their designated patrol area was the Northern District, a dense cluster of office buildings and narrow streets. "Let's do our best, everyone," Ida declared, already in his Ingenium armor, his engines letting off a low hum. "Our coordination must be flawless to ensure a swift and successful outcome. Yeah! Let's show them what 1A is made of." Uraraka cheered, pumping a fist in the air. Izuku nodded, forcing a smile. "I can do this. 8% is enough." I just have to be smart. I have to be fast. I have to be like All Might. The exercise began. The city replica came alive with the sounds of simulated chaos. Distant explosions, panic screams piped through hidden speakers, and the occasional maniacal laugh from one of the teacher villains. Their team moved out, falling into a practice formation. Ida took the lead, his speed allowing him to scout ahead. Uraraka and Izuku formed the core, ready for combat or rescue, while Tokoyami and Dark Shadow provided aerial reconnaissance and support from the rooftops. Monoma trailed behind, offering a running commentary of sarcastic remarks. My Midoriya, Monoma said, his voice dripping with condescension. You seem rather tense. Is the pressure of being All Might's supposed favorite finally getting to you? Don't worry if you freeze up, I can always copy your quirk and show you how it's really done. Izuku ignored him, his senses on high alert. He could do this. He had to. This was his test. A test of his own power, his own merit. The plan started to go wrong 10 minutes in. It began subtly. Their comms, usually crystal clear, crackled with static before cutting out completely. Technical glitch? Uraraka asked, tapping her earpiece. I can't hear Aizawa-sensei. Unlikely. Ida responded, his own comms dead. UA's equipment is state-of-the-art. This feels intentional. Tokoyami landed on the street beside them, Dark Shadow retracting into his cloak. The Western District is in disarray, he reported, his voice grim. But not from a mock battle. The destruction is real, and the ones causing it are not teachers. A shiver of ice-cold dread went down Izuku's spine. He had felt this before. The feeling of a controlled environment spiraling into genuine danger. Before anyone could react, the street in front of them exploded. Not with the flashy, non-lethal pyrotechnics of a training exercise, but a real, concussive blast that sent asphalt and shrapnel flying. The force of it threw them back. Izuku hit the wall of a building hard, the wind knocked out of him. Through the smoke and dust, figures emerged. There were about a dozen of them, clad in matching dark gray combat gear with glowing purple accents. They weren't the flamboyant villains the students were used to seeing. They moved with a cold, professional efficiency, fanning out to surround them. Their faces were hidden behind sleek, impersonal helmets. Targets acquired! A voice crackled from one of the figures, distorted by a modulator. Engage and capture. These weren't actors. This was a real attack. In the control room, pandemonium erupted. Aizawa and Vlad King watched in horror as screens showing other teams went to static one by one. What's going on? Vlad King roared. Who are these people? They bypassed the outer perimeter and disabled the entire communications grid from the inside, Niza said, his voice dangerously calm as he watched the monitors. Their tech is sophisticated. This was a planned, coordinated infiltration. Aizawa's eyes were locked on the screen showing Izuku's team. They're cornered. Get the other pros in there now. We're trying, a technician said, her fingers flying across a keyboard. They've locked us out of the main gate controls and established a high-frequency jamming field. We're blind and deaf. On the streets of Hosu, the fight was a desperate, chaotic scramble. Ida's recipro burst was fast, but the villains were faster, using strange grappling hooks that fired from their gauntlets to anticipate his movements and trip him up. Uraraka managed to make one of them weightless, but another fired a sticky, tar-like substance that grounded her, pinning her to the pavement. Tokoyami unleashed Dark Shadow, who was a formidable force in the shadowed alleyways. But the villains were prepared. Several of them produced high-intensity flash grenades, forcing Dark Shadow to recoil in pain and shrink back. Monoma, for all his bravado, was out of his depth. He managed to touch one of the villains, but his quirk didn't copy anything. Their suits must be blocking it, he yelled, his face pale with fear as he dodged a stun blast. It all fell to Izuku. One for all, full cowling! He yelled, green lightning enveloping his body. He moved, a verdant blur against the gray concrete. He was faster, stronger. He landed a solid kick on one villain, sending him flying into a wall. But as he turned, two more were on him. They didn't fight like thugs. They fought like a trained unit, their movements economical and brutal. One fired a net that crackled with electricity, forcing Izuku to leap back, while the other laid down suppressing fire with a rifle that fired hard light projectiles. This wasn't working. They were being systematically dismantled. Their leader, a taller figure with more prominent purple piping on his suit, stepped forward. He watched Izuku's display of power with an analytical tilt of his helmeted head. Subject identified. The leader's modulated voice announced. Izuku Midoriya. High energy emission quirk. Prime target. The leader raised a hand, and the gauntlet on his arm began to glow with a hungry, violet light. Izuku, seeing an opening, pushed his 8% to its limit and charged, aiming a St. Louis smash at the leader's chest. It was a mistake. Just as his foot was about to connect, the leader's palm met his kick. The violet light flared, and Izuku felt the power of One for All being drained from his leg. It was like a siphon had been attached directly to his quirk, pulling the energy out of him. The green lightning sputtered and died, and his leg went limp and powerless. The kick, which should have had the force of a small car crash, landed with a pathetic thud. The leader grabbed his leg, twisted, and threw him effortlessly across the street. Izuku crashed into a storefront, shattering the glass and collapsing in a heap of bruised limbs and shattered pride. My quirk is energy absorption, the leader stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He began to walk towards Izuku's crumpled form. The more you use your power, the stronger I become. You cannot win. From her position pinned to the ground, Uraraka watched in horror. Deku-kun! She screamed. Ida, tangled in grappling lines, struggled to get free. Midoriya! They were going to lose. No, they were going to be captured or killed. These people weren't playing games. Izuku pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. His leg was numb, the connection to One for All temporarily severed. He felt weak, helpless. His plan to rely only on his own power, to prove himself worthy, had been a catastrophic failure. His pride had endangered his friends. He saw the leader raise his hand again, the energy absorption gauntlet glowing brighter, now fueled by the power it had stolen from Izuku. He was aiming at Ida and Uraraka, who were both still incapacitated. He was going to take them out first. A cold, primal fear, deeper than any he had felt before, seized Izuku. It wasn't fear for himself. It was the terror of seeing the people he cared about to be hurt because he wasn't strong enough. He was failing them. Again. No. I won't let you. He needed more power. Not the reckless power of One for All that this villain could just eat for breakfast. He needed something else. He needed help. The thought wasn't a word. It was a raw, desperate, soul-deep scream that he didn't voice aloud. He closed his eyes, his mind fixated on the image of the hammer sitting in his laundry basket miles away. He called out to it, not with logic or reason, but with the full, desperate force of his heroic spirit. He poured all his fear, all his desperation, all his unwavering desire to protect, into that single, silent plea. I need you. Please. Miles away, in the quiet of room 204 of the Heights Alliance dormitory, a faint blue light began to pulse from the bottom of a laundry basket. The light intensified, and the air around it began to hum with power. The All Might-themed beach towel was pushed aside as the hammer, Mjolnir, rose from the clothes. It hovered in the air for a moment, the engravings on its head glowing with brilliant azure light. It seemed to orient itself, sensing the direction of its master's call. Then it moved. Crash! Mjolnir smashed through the window of Izuku's dorm room, showering the lawn below with shattered glass. It didn't slow down. It became a silver-blue streak, a guided missile of myth and metal. It rocketed across the UE campus, a blur that was faster than any eye could follow. It cleared the campus walls and shot across the sky above Muzurifu, a comet on a mission. It moved with impossible speed and unerring accuracy, homing in on the source of that desperate call. Back in the Hosu replica, the villain leader was about to fire a blast of concentrated energy at Uraraka. Izuku watched, helpless, his heart stopping in his chest. Time seemed to slow down. Then came a sound. A high-pitched, piercing whistle that cut through the air. The villain leader paused, his head tilting as if sensing something. Before he could react, a silver-blue object, trailing ozone and raw power, smashed into his back with the force of a freight train. Boom! The impact was thunderous. The leader was thrown forward, his armor cracking as he flew past Uraraka and slammed into a concrete wall with enough force to crater it. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious, his energy siphoning gauntlet shattering into 1,000 pieces. The silver-blue object, having neutralized the threat, flipped through the air in a graceful arc, and landed, with a perfect, solid thwack, in Izuku Midoriya's outstretched hand. The entire street fell silent. The remaining villains froze, their professional cool utterly broken. Ida, Uraraka, Tokoemi, and even a stunned Monoma stared, their jaws agati. Izuku stood there, Mjolnir held firmly in his grip. The familiar, calming hum of its power flowed into him, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of One for All. It was a power that couldn't be siphoned, couldn't be stolen. It was absolute. A brilliant blue lightning, far more potent than the sparks he'd managed before, began to arc around him, a crackling aura of pure, controlled power. It danced across his green costume, mingled with the faint, sputtering sparks of his recovering One for All. He stood protectively in front of his friends, his expression no longer one of fear, but of grim, unwavering resolve. "Whoa!" Monoma whispered, his usual sarcasm completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. One of the villains snapped out of his shock. "He has a new weapon! Subdue him!" "Now!" they charged. It was a foolish, desperate move. Izuku met their charge not with brute force, but with a newfound grace. The hammer felt like a part of him. He channeled a recovering 6% of OFA into his legs for speed and agility, and Mjolnir did the rest. He moved like a storm. A villain fired his hard light rifle. Izuku spun, Mjolnir a blur, and deflected the blasts with a series of metallic clangs, sending the projectiles ricocheting into the walls. Another came at him with an electrified baton. Izuku ducked under the swing and slammed the flat of the hammer into the villain's chest, not with enough force to kill, but with a concussive blast of energy that sent the man flying back, his suit shorting out. He threw the hammer. It flew in a wide arc, smashing into 3 villains at once, disarming them and sending them sprawling before returning to his hand with its signature homing missile whistle. He was a whirlwind of green and blue lightning, a seamless fusion of inherited power and mythical might. One for All gave him the speed to dodge and weave, to be everywhere at once. Mjolnir gave him the unyielding defense and overwhelming offense. He wasn't breaking his bones. He wasn't overexerting himself. For the first time, he felt powerful. Truly, controllably powerful. Only a few villains remained, their morale shattered. They began to fall back, trying to regroup. "You're not getting away," Izuku said, his voice low and steady. He raised Mjolnir to the sky. The domed roof of the facility, designed to simulate a real sky, began to darken. The lights flickered. Clouds, thick and black and charged with energy, began to swirl into existence above them, a localized, impossible weather phenomenon. The air grew heavy and cold, thick with the smell of rain and ozone. "Is he doing that?" Uraraka asked in a hushed whisper, having finally freed herself from the tar. Thunder rumbled not from speakers, but from the artificial clouds above. Blue lightning spiderwebbed across the dome. Izuku brought the hammer down. It was not a single bolt. It was a storm. A dozen controlled, targeted lightning strikes rained down from the sky. They didn't hit the villains directly. They hit their weapons, the power packs on their suits, the street around their feet, erupting in showers of sparks and disabling electrical pulses. Their advanced tech sputtered and died. Their rifles powered down. Their suits went dark. Within seconds, the entire remaining squad was neutralized, disarmed, and incapacitated without a single life-threatening injury. The artificial clouds dissipated. The lights in the dome returned to normal. Silence. Izuku stood in the center of the street, Mjolnir humming softly in his hand, surrounded by the defeated forms of their attackers. He was panting, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer adrenaline of it all. His friends stared at him. Their expressions were a mixture of relief, shock, and profound, speechless awe. He wasn't just Deku, the boy who broke his bones. He was something else entirely. In the control room, the silence was even more profound. The technicians, Aizawa, Vlad King, and Niza had watched the entire spectacle on the one remaining active monitor. They had seen the villains' coordinated attack. They had seen their students overwhelmed. They had seen Izuku's desperation, and they had seen a hammer smash through a wall miles away and fly to his hand. They had seen him command the storm. Aizawa was pale, his usual bored expression replaced by one of stark disbelief. He slowly turned his head to look at All Might, who had rushed into the room moments before, his face a mask of worry. Toshinori, seeing the hammer in his successor's hand on the screen, felt his own heart stop. His advice had been for caution and secrecy. The secret was now very, very out. Vlad King finally found his voice. What was that? What was that quirk? I've never seen anything like it. Nizu, the principal, was not shocked. He was fascinated. He steepled his paws together, a predatory glint in his black eyes. That, he said, his voice brimming with an almost terrifying intellectual curiosity, was not a quirk. Aizawa's gaze snapped from the screen to All Might, his eyes narrowed and intense. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was cold, sharp, and utterly serious. Toshinori. All Might flinched at the use of his real name. Problem child, Aizawa said, his eyes never leaving All Might's. Just brought a mythological weapon to a quirk fight. You have a lot of explaining to do. The interrogation room was stark, sterile, and suffocatingly gray. It was one of the few places in Yue High School utterly devoid of color or character, designed for the sole purpose of extracting truth. A single, heavy metal table sat bolted to the floor, surrounded by 4 chairs. Izuku Midoriya sat in one of them, his hands clasped so tightly on the table his knuckles were white. Mjolnir rested on the floor beside his chair, a silent, brooding companion whose very presence seemed to absorb the light in the room. Across from him sat the triumvirate of Yue's leadership. Principal Nizu, a picture of unnerving calm, his beady black eyes reflecting the overhead fluorescent light with an intelligent gleam. To his right, Shota Aizawa, his homeroom teacher, looked even more exhausted than usual, which was a remarkable feat. His arms were crossed, his posture radiating a tense mixture of frustration and concern. And to Nizu's left, Toshinori Yagi, skeletal and gaunt in an oversized suit, looking for all the world like a defense attorney who knew his client was guilty. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. It had been hours since the Hosu incident. The real villains had been apprehended, their advanced technology confiscated for analysis. The cover story fed to the public and the other students was that it was an unannounced, hyper-realistic Phase 2 of the training exercise, designed to test their response to a complete system failure. Most had bought it, though the dazed, awestruck looks from the members of Izuku's team told a different story. They knew they had witnessed something far beyond the scope of a school drill. Finally Nizu broke the silence, his voice pleasant and disarming. Well now, Midoriya-kun. That was quite the display. Izuku flinched. I'm sorry, sir. I know I broke protocol. I hid the hammer, and I used an unregistered power source during a training exercise. I am prepared to accept the consequences. His voice was a practiced, apologetic murmur. Consequences? My dear boy, you neutralized a dozen highly equipped hostiles who had bypassed our entire security network and were about to capture or grievously injure your classmates, Nizu countered, a small, unnerving smile playing on his muzzle. From a results-oriented perspective, your performance was exemplary. It is the how that we find ourselves intensely curious about. Aizawa leaned forward, his gaze pinning Izuku to his seat. The hammer. Let's start there. You lifted it from the crater 2 nights ago. It wasn't a question. Izuku swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sensei. And you failed to report this to any Yui staff. I told All Might, Izuku mumbled, glancing at his mentor. Toshinori winced as Aizawa's glare shifted to him, sharp as a razor. And you, Toshinori, Aizawa said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, failed to report that one of your students was in possession of an anomalous object of world-stopping interest. An object that the Hero Public Safety Commission is currently tearing their hair out trying to locate, I might add. I advise caution, Toshinori said, his voice weak but firm. The boy didn't understand the power. We didn't want to cause a panic or put him in unnecessary danger until we knew what we were dealing with. He summoned a localized thunderstorm in a contained environment. Aizawa shot back, his voice rising for the first time. I think we're a little past unnecessary danger. Gentlemen, please, Nisa interjected smoothly, raising a single paw. Infighting will not provide us with the answers we seek. Midoriya-kun, you are not in trouble. You are, however, in a unique and precarious position. We need to understand. Tell us everything you know. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. And so, Izuku did. He recounted the strange pull he felt, the effortless way he lifted the hammer when heroes 10 times his strength had failed. He described the hum of energy, the accidental lightning bolt that had singed his all-might poster, the shock of throwing the hammer and having it returned to his hand. He even, with a hesitant voice, told them the name he had heard whispered in his mind. Mjolnir, he finished, the words sounding alien and absurd in the sterile room. Nisa's whiskers twitched. From the Norse myths. The hammer of Thor. Fascinating. He didn't sound skeptical. He sounded like a scientist who had just been presented with proof of a theory he'd long held but could never prove. He saw this not as a problem, but as a paradigm-shifting event. Quirks had been the bedrock of their society for generations. Now, here was something else. A new type of power, a new set of rules. For a being like Nizu, whose entire existence was defined by intellect and strategy, this was the most exciting thing to happen in a century. Aizawa, on the other hand, was the embodiment of pragmatic concern. He rubbed his tired eyes, the implications washing over him like a tidal wave. So, let me get this straight. You have an inherited, power stockpiling quirk that makes you the primary target for the country's most dangerous villain. And now, you also have a legendary magic hammer of unimaginable power that chose you for unknown reasons. The sheer size of the target on your back has just grown exponentially. Villains, governments, foreign powers, everyone who learns of this will want to control it. Or destroy it. The weight of Aizawa's words settled on Izuku, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd only been thinking about keeping the secret, not the consequences if it got out. Now, thanks to his actions in Hosu, it was beginning to. We will manage the fallout, Nisa said decisively. The villains from the exercise are being interrogated by Tsukauchi. Their technology is being analyzed by Power Loader. For now, the official story holds. Midoriya's display will be classified as a temporary new application of his quirk under extreme stress, a rare but not unheard of phenomenon. But the 4 of us, in this room, know the truth, and we will proceed with that knowledge. Midoriya-kun, your training will have to be adjusted. You must learn to control this Mjolnir, with the same diligence you apply to One for All, and you will do it here, at UA, where we can protect you and study the phenomenon. The interrogation was over. Izuku felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. He wasn't expelled, but his life had just become infinitely more complicated. As he stood to leave, All Might placed a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing today, my boy, he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. You saved your friends. Never doubt that. Izuku could only nod, the words providing a small warmth in the cold fear that had taken root in his heart. That night, sleep did not come easy. Izuku lay in his bed, his mind racing. The events of the day played on a loop, the shock on his friends' faces, the cold logic of the villains, Aizawa's worried anger, Nisa's unnerving excitement. Mjolnir sat on his desk, silent and dark, yet its presence filled the room. It was a constant, physical reminder of how his life had veered off every known map. He finally drifted into an uneasy slumber, his exhaustion pulling him under. But it was not a restful sleep. He did not dream of training or of school. He dreamt of a bridge. He was standing on a causeway of solid, shimmering light, a dazzling spectrum of colors that seemed to flow like a river beneath his feet. It stretched from a swirling nebula of gold and purple starlight to a distant, shining city that defied gravity, its golden towers and spires piercing the cosmos. The air was thin and clean, tasting of ozone and ancient starlight. There was no sound, only a profound, celestial silence. He was alone, a small, green-clad figure in an impossibly vast and beautiful landscape. He looked down at his hands. They were his own. He was not dreaming in the abstract. He was here. You are a long way from home, Izuku Midoriya. The voice was not a sound, but a presence that filled his mind, much like the name Mjolnir had. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of eons. It was a voice that had witnessed the birth of galaxies and the death of stars. Izuku spun around. Standing at the head of the Rainbow Bridge, silhouetted against the golden glow of the city, was a figure. He was tall, impossibly so, clad in ornate golden armor that seemed to be forged from sunlight itself. He held a massive, two-handed sword, its blade resting on the crystalline bridge before him. But it was his eyes that captured Izuku's attention. They were a piercing, molten gold, and they saw everything. They were not looking at Izuku. They were looking through him, reading the history of his soul, the secrets of one for all, the fear and the hope warring within him. Who are you? Izuku stammered, his voice feeling small and inadequate in the vastness. Where am I? I am Heimdall, gatekeeper of Asgard, the figure stated, his voice calm and steady. And this is the Bifrost, the bridge between worlds. You stand on the threshold of the Golden Realm, Asgard. The name from the myths. It was real. This place was real. Izuku's mind, already stretched to its breaking point, threatened to snap. Mjolnir. Izuku managed to say. The hammer. Yes, Heimdall said, his golden eyes never leaving Izuku's. Mjolnir was sent to your realm, to Midgard, on the command of the All-Father, Odin. Its master, Prince Thor, is occupied. A great and terrible war rages in the far corners of the cosmos, a war that demanded his presence. The All-Father feared that with the 9 realms in turmoil, Midgard would be left vulnerable, and so, he sent the hammer, bearing the worthiness enchantment, to seek out a temporary guardian. A champion to protect the realm in Thor's stead. Heimdall's gaze intensified. It searched for a long time. It felt the hearts of your world's heroes. It felt their power, their pride, their ambition, their greed. It remained unmoved. And then it felt you. Izuku shook his head in disbelief. But why me? I'm not worthy? Heimdall finished. The corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. You mortals have a strange concept of worthiness. You equate it with strength, with victory, with a lack of fear. Odin's enchantment is not so simple. Mjolnir does not seek the strongest arm, or the bravest tongue. It seeks a selfless heart. A heart that is willing to sacrifice everything, not for glory or for power, but for the sake of others. It seeks a spirit that will shatter itself to shield the innocent. Heimdall's golden eyes softened for a fraction of a second. It felt your run towards the sludge villain when you were a powerless child. It felt you break your body again and again to master a power that was not your own. It felt your terror in the crater, not for yourself, but for the legacy you carried. And it felt your pure, desperate plea to save your friends in the simulated city. That is worthiness, son of Midgard. Not the absence of fear, but the triumph of compassion over it. The weight of the words settled onto Izuku, a burden far heavier than One for All had ever been. This wasn't just about being All Might's successor anymore. This wasn't just about becoming the new symbol of peace for Japan. This was a cosmic mantle. A sacred duty. Guardian of Midgard. Protector of the entire planet. I can't, Izuku whispered, the sheer scale of the responsibility crushing him. I'm just a student. I'm just a kid. The hammer disagrees, Heimdall stated simply. And Mjolnir is rarely wrong. The forces that threaten your world are not limited to the squabbles of those with quirks. There are older, darker things in the universe that see your nascent world as a prize to be taken. Be vigilant. Be strong. Be worthy. The golden light of Asgard began to fade. The rainbow colors of the Bifrost dissolved into mist. Heimdall's towering form became a shimmering silhouette. Wait! Izuku called out, desperate for more answers. What do I do? How do I fight? Heimdall's final words echoed in his mind as the dream dissolved into darkness. You have the storm in your hand. You have the fire of heroes in your blood. Learn to make them dance as one. Izuku woke with a jolt, sitting bolt upright in his bed. His heart was pounding, and he was covered in a cold sweat. The dream had been more real than reality. Asgard. Heimdall. Guardian of Midgard. He scrambled out of bed and went to his desk, picking up Mjolnir. It felt different now. It was no longer just an impossibly powerful, mysterious object. It had a purpose. It had a history, and it had chosen him for a reason that was both humbling and terrifying. He shared the dream with All Might later that morning in a hushed, frantic conversation behind the gym. His mentor listened, his already wide eyes growing wider with every word. By the end of it, Toshinori looked as if he had aged another 10 years. Asgard is real, Toshinori said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Gods are real. And they have drafted my successor into a cosmic war. He looked at the sky, a helpless expression on his face. My power came with a great legacy and a terrible nemesis. It seems this hammer comes with the keys to the rest of the universe. The scale of this, it is beyond anything I prepared you for. What do I do, All Might? Izuku asked, his voice pleading. Toshinori looked down at the boy, at his successor who now carried the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. You do what you have always done, young Midoriya, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old, booming confidence. You keep moving forward. You learn. You train. And you lean on your friends. You are not alone in this. Toshinori's advice proved prophetic. The atmosphere in Class 1A had changed. The story about Izuku's new quirk application was flimsy at best, and no one who had been on the scene truly believed it. But instead of suspicion, there was a palpable sense of awe and a flood of new questions. The first to approach him was Shoto Todoroki. He found Izuku by one of the campus lakes, where Izuku was staring at his reflection in the water, Mjolnir sitting on the grass beside him. Todoroki didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on the hammer. After a long moment he spoke, his voice its usual calm monotone. The lightning you summoned, it was not like Kaminari's. His is wild, unfocused. Yours was precise. Elemental. I'm still trying to understand it, Izuku admitted. Todoroki nodded, looking from the hammer to Izuku. My father's fire is a tool of ambition. My ice, it was born of spite. But I am learning to make it my own. A power is more than its source, it is the intent of its wielder. He met Izuku's gaze. I cannot help you with the strength your quirk provides. But the lightning, it is an element. Like my fire and ice, if you wish, I can help you train. To control the elemental aspect. To feel it. To shape it. It was the longest, most personal speech Izuku had ever heard from Todoroki. It was an offer of help, of mentorship from a peer. It was an acknowledgement of a strange kinship between their powers. Izuku felt a surge of gratitude. I'd like that, Todoroki-kun. Thank you. Uraraka's approach was different. She didn't care about the source of the power. She cared about the person wielding it. She found him in the common room that evening, nervously trying to polish Mjolnir with a soft cloth, an act that was completely unnecessary as the hammer seemed to repel all forms of dirt. She sat down next to him on the couch. You're carrying a lot, aren't you, Deku-kun? She asked softly, her big brown eyes full of concern. It's a lot, he admitted, his shoulders slumping. We were all so scared, she continued. But then you stood up with that thing, and you weren't scared anymore. You were just there. For us. Like you always are. She offered him a small, brilliant smile. So, don't think you have to carry it all by yourself, okay? We're your friends. Let us help carry some of it. She didn't offer training or analysis. She offered emotional support, a quiet, steadfast presence that was more comforting than any strategic advice. The most explosive reaction, predictably, came from Katsuki Bakugo. He cornered Izuku after a grueling physical training session with Aizawa. The rest of the class had already headed for the showers, but Bakugo blocked Izuku's path, his red eyes burning with an intensity that was frightening even by his standards. We need to talk, he growled. He dragged Izuku to one of the empty training grounds, the same one where they'd had their second, post-license exam fight. The air crackled with tension. That hammer, Bakugo spat, jabbing a finger in Izuku's direction. That storm. That was not your damn quirk. Don't lie to me. I've been watching you my entire life, you shitty nerd. I know what your power looks like. That was something else. Izuku's heart pounded. He couldn't tell him the truth. It was too big, too dangerous. Kaken, it's complicated. I don't care about complicated. Bakugo roared, small explosions popping in his palms. I want to know what trick you're using. First, you get a quirk out of nowhere from All Might. Now you're pulling magic hammers out of thin air and playing God of Thunder? What is it, Deku? What is it about you that makes all this impossible shit happen? The anger in his voice was raw, but underneath it, Izuku heard something else. Something he'd heard in their last fight. It was fear. It was a desperate, clawing confusion. Bakugo's world was built on a simple premise. He was the strongest, destined for the top. But Izuku kept breaking the rules of that world, pulling further and further away with powers that Bakugo couldn't comprehend or replicate. It was infuriating, yes, but it was also terrifying. It chose me, Kaken, Izuku said quietly, looking his childhood rival in the eye. That's all I can say. That non-answer seemed to infuriate Bakugo more than any lie could have. Chose you? What the hell does that even mean? What makes you so damn special that you get chosen? He didn't want to fight. He wanted an answer, a logical reason for why the universe seemed to be bending itself around the useless, crybaby Deku he'd known his whole life. To be told it was simply because he was worthy was an insult beyond measure, for it implied a quality Izuku possessed that he, Katsuki Bakugo, lacked. He stormed off without another word, leaving Izuku alone on the training field, the chasm between them wider than ever. Meanwhile, in a dilapidated warehouse in the city's underbelly, a place that reeked of decay and despair, Tamura Shigaraki was scratching his neck with a feverish intensity. The skin was red and raw. His perfect plan to assault Yue had failed. His new, technologically advanced soldiers had been neutralized. His leader had been taken down by a single, impossible blow. And it was all because of him, Izuku Midoriya. The television in the corner of the room was replaying the news report, which included a grainy, zoomed-in shot from a helicopter of Izuku standing in the street, holding the hammer. Yue. First-year Izuku Midoriya showcases a stunning new application of his quirk. A reporter was saying, "Lies," Shigaraki rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "It's all lies. Another cheat code. Another power-up for the hero brat. It's not fair. It's like this whole game is rigged." He slammed his fist on the table, and the wood crumbled into dust under his 5-point touch. "Oh, it is most certainly rigged, my dear boy. But not in the way you think." The voice was new. It was smooth, cultured, and laced with a charismatic, silken arrogance. It flowed from the darkest corner of the warehouse, a corner that even Shigaraki's keen eyes hadn't been able to penetrate. Shigaraki and the other members of the League, Dabi, Toga, Twice, Spinner, spun around, taking defensive stances. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was tall and lean, with pale skin and slicked-back black hair. He was dressed in a finely tailored, dark green and black suit that looked absurdly out of place in the grimy warehouse. His eyes were a mischievous, intelligent green, and a smirk played on his lips, a smirk that held a universe of condescension and amusement. "And who the hell are you?" Dabi asked, his hand already beginning to glow with blue fire. The man's smirk widened. He gave a theatrical, mocking bow. "A humble admirer of chaos. A connoisseur of fine mischief. And most importantly," he said, his eyes landing on the television screen, "the rightful owner of that which your little hero has stolen." He gestured, and a shimmer of green energy flickered around his hand. "He has my brother's toy. A toy I am quite fond of myself. Unfortunately, the brutish oaf put a rather tiresome enchantment on it." His gaze shifted back to Shigaraki, and it was sharp and predatory. "You wish for destruction. You wish to tear down the pillars of this society, to watch the heroes crumble into dust. I wish to retrieve my property and, in the process, break the spirit of its new wielder." He stepped closer, the shadows seeming to cling to him like a cloak. "Perhaps," the man said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you and I can help each other." A smirking Loki, god of mischief, stepped fully into the dim light of the League of Villains hideout. And the game was about to change. The air in the League of Villains hideout, already thick with the stench of dust and decay, grew heavy with a tangible, electric tension. The newcomer, this Loki, carried with him an aura that was utterly alien to their world. It wasn't the raw, destructive power of a top-tier quirk like All for One's, nor the fanatical zeal of someone like Stain. It was something older, colder, and infinitely more cunning. It was the arrogance of a being who considered the very rules of their reality to be suggestions, not laws. Shigaraki Tamura stopped scratching his neck. His crimson eyes, narrowed into slits, raked over Loki, analyzing, dissecting. He saw the expensive suit, the condescending smirk, the effortless confidence. He saw a man who didn't belong, a player who had just walked onto the board from a game he didn't recognize. Rightful owner? Shigaraki rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. That thing fell from the sky. Finders keepers, pretty boy. Dabi, ever the pragmatist, didn't wait for conversation. A torrent of brilliant blue flame erupted from his palm, roaring across the short distance to engulf Loki. The heat was intense, instantly blistering the paint on the far wall and turning the air to a shimmering haze. It was a fire hot enough to cremate a man in seconds, and it passed right through him. Loki didn't even flinch. The flames washed over his form as if he were a projection, a ghost made of smoke and moonlight. When the fire died down, he stood in the exact same spot, brushing an imaginary piece of lint from his lapel. Crude, Loki commented, his smirk not wavering in the slightest. And so very, very loud. Is this how you conduct all your business? No wonder your plans end in such spectacular failure. The members of the league tensed. Dabi's flames flickered with renewed intensity. Toga Himiko giggled, a manic sound in the tense silence, her hand drifting to the knife on her thigh. Spinner gripped the hilt of his makeshift sword. Loki raised an elegant hand. Peace, my violent little friends. I am not your enemy. In fact, I am here to offer you an alliance. A partnership. We don't do partnerships, Shigaraki snarled. The League has a mission. We don't need help from some illusionist. An illusionist? Loki's laugh was a low, melodious chuckle that was more unnerving than Dabi's fire. Oh, my dear, decaying boy. My talents are far more substantial than mere parlor tricks. To demonstrate, he flicked his wrist. The grimy, cracked concrete floor beneath their feet shimmered and transformed. In an instant, it became a polished, obsidian black mirror. Their reflections stared back up at them, but they were twisted, nightmarish versions of themselves. Dabi's reflection was a charred skeleton wreathed in cold fire. Toga's was a featureless mannequin made of glistening blood. Shigaraki's was a crumbling statue, turning to dust before his own eyes. Toga gasped, a mixture of horror and delight on her face. Dabi took an involuntary step back. Shigaraki stared, transfixed, at the image of his own decay. With another wave of Loki's hand, the floor returned to normal. A taste, he said smoothly. My illusions have substance. They have weight. They can touch, they can feel, and they can most certainly hurt. I am a god, you see. And you are playing a game far grander than you realize. Shigaraki's mind was racing. This being's power was unlike any quirk he'd ever encountered. It wasn't just projection. It was reality manipulation on a localized scale. It was a power that could bypass physical durability, a power that attacked the mind. A power that could create the chaos he craved on a level he had only dreamed of. You want the hammer, Shigaraki stated, his voice now devoid of its earlier petulance, replaced by a cold, calculating tone. Why? Let's call it a family heirloom, Loki said, his eyes glinting with an ancient, bitter resentment. My brother Thor is a brutish, sentimental fool. He cherishes that ugly paperweight. I, on the other hand, appreciate its power. And I am far more deserving of it. His gaze flickered with genuine venom. The enchantment on it prevents me from lifting it directly. It is keyed to a certain, nauseatingly noble disposition. A disposition I thankfully do not possess. He began to pace, his movements graceful and predatory. However, the enchantment is not absolute. It is tied to the spirit of the wielder. If the wielder's spirit is broken, if their will is shattered, if they are proven, in their own heart, to be unworthy, then their connection to Mjolnir will sever. It will become a simple, albeit very dense, piece of Yaru metal. A metal that I can then claim and re-enchant to my own specifications. A slow, predatory grin spread across Shigaraki's chapped lips. He understood now. This wasn't about a frontal assault. This was about psychological warfare. It was about destroying the hero from the inside out. It was about causing so much pain and doubt that the hero himself would be the architect of his own downfall. It was a beautifully, exquisitely cruel idea. It was art. And what do we get out of it? Shigaraki asked, the final piece of the negotiation. Everything you desire, Loki purred, spreading his arms wide. I will be your chaos engine. I will sow discord amongst the heroes, turn the public against them, and give your league the tools to create havoc on a scale this little island nation has never seen. I will amplify your quirks, twist your enemies' perceptions, and lead them into traps of their own making. All I ask for in return is that you focus your efforts on one small, green-haired boy. Hurl your monsters at him. Threaten everything he holds dear. Be the relentless, grinding pressure on his soul. I will handle the rest. Shigaraki looked at his comrades. Dalby was still wary, but intrigued. Toga was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of seeing her beloved Izuku in so much pain. Twice was arguing with himself. A god! We're teaming up with a god, / he's creepy. Don't trust him. This was the power-up they needed. This was the key to the next level of the game. All right, Godling, Shigaraki said, extending a hand, careful to keep his pinky finger raised. You have a deal. Loki's smirk transformed into a full, triumphant grin. He took Shigaraki's hand, a flicker of green energy passing between them, sealing the unholy alliance. Excellent, Loki said. Let the games begin. Izuku's life settled into a new, bizarre routine. By day, he was a Yui student, pushed to his limits in grueling training sessions. By night, he was a student of the cosmic, training in secret with Mjolnir under the watchful eyes of All Might, and occasionally, a begrudgingly helpful Todoroki. The sessions with Todoroki were strange and enlightening. They would go to one of the more isolated training grounds, Ground Omega, a vast, empty wasteland of rock and sand. Don't think of it as electricity, Todoroki had said during their first session, his breath misting in the cool air he generated from his right side. That's Kaminari's mistake. He thinks he's a battery. You're not. You're a conduit for something that wants to be free. Feel it. Don't force it. Izuku tried. He held Mjolnir aloft, closing his eyes and trying to tap into that deep, calm well of power. He focused not on the crackling energy, but on the feeling of the air before a storm, the heavy stillness, the scent of ozone. A small, controlled arc of blue lightning leaped from the hammer to a nearby rock, leaving a small, black scorch mark. Better, Todoroki said, a hint of approval in his voice. You're directing it with intent, not just letting it explode. Now try to sustain it. A steady stream. Not a bolt, a current. It was harder than it sounded. The power wanted to be released in explosive bursts. To control it, to turn it into a steady flow, required a level of concentration that left Izuku drenched in sweat. But slowly, painstakingly, he was learning. He was learning the difference between the raging wildfire of one for all and the focused, channeled power of a lightning strike. But as his control over the hammer grew, a new, insidious front opened in a war he didn't even know he was fighting. Loki's game had begun. It started small. So small, in fact, that at first, no one noticed. During a patrol exercise in the city, Izuku, paired with Kirishima, responded to a silent alarm at a jewelry store. They arrived to find the front window smashed and a single, low-level villain with a minor gigantification quirk stuffing jewels into a bag. It was a textbook case. Stop right there, villain! Kirishima yelled, hardening his arms as he charged in. The villain dropped the bag and put his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Okay. You got me. I give up. He whimpered, shrinking down to his normal size. It seemed too easy. Izuku felt a prickle of unease. As Kirishima moved in to apply the capture cuffs, the villain looked directly at Izuku. His eyes, for a split second, flashed with a mischievous green light, and his face seemed to momentarily flicker, shifting into the cruel, smirking visage of the man from Izuku's nightmares, Loki. Then, the villain's form dissolved into a shower of shimmering green motes of light, like fading embers. The jewels he had stolen clattered to the ground, also dissolving into nothingness. It had all been an illusion. Kirishima stared, dumbfounded. Whoa, what kind of quirk was that? Izuku's blood ran cold. It wasn't a quirk. It was him. The god from his vision of Asgard? No, Heimdall was a guardian. This was something else. A trickster. The incidents grew more frequent, and more psychologically taxing. A week later, during a disaster simulation, Izuku's team was tasked with rescuing civilians, faculty in disguise, from a collapsing building. As he and Uraraka phased through a wall, he saw a little girl trapped under a concrete slab, crying for her mother. She had white hair and a small horn on her head. Eri, his heart seized. Forgetting it was a simulation, he surged forward, his mind flashing back to the frantic battle against Overhaul. Eri-chan! I'm here, he yelled, pouring one for all into his arms to lift the slab. But as he touched it, the entire scene wavered. The girl looked up at him, her crying face twisting into a mocking grin. You were too slow then, too, she said, her voice not Eri's, but a smooth, masculine tenor. You always are. The image dissolved. The girl, the slab, all of it vanished. He was left in an empty room, his heart pounding, the ghost of his failure with Sir Night Eye washing over him. Uraraka looked at him, her face pale with confusion and concern. Deku-kun? What's wrong? There was nothing here. Loki was playing with his head. He was using his greatest fears, his deepest regrets, as weapons against him. The god of mischief was not attacking his body. He was systematically dismantling his confidence, his certainty. He was making him doubt his own senses. The paranoia began to set in. Every new mission, every strange occurrence, he second-guessed. Is this real? Is this another trick? His hesitation became noticeable. During a sparring match against Bakugo, he saw a flicker of green in Bakugo's eyes and flinched, expecting an illusion. The hesitation cost him. Bakugo used the opening to land a clean, powerful blast that sent him flying out of the ring. What the hell was that, Deku? Bakugo roared, not with triumph, but with genuine frustration. You just gave up. Your mind was somewhere else. He was right. Izuku's mind was constantly on edge, trying to separate reality from Loki's elaborate fictions. The strain was immense. He became jumpy, irritable, his nights filled with restless sleep and fleeting nightmares of golden-eyed guardians and smirking, green-eyed gods. The media, subtly manipulated by Loki's whispers in the ears of opportunistic reporters and bloggers, began to pick up on the narrative. Stories began to circulate. Is Yue's new prodigy unstable? One headline read. Sources report erratic behavior from Izuku Midoriya. Another article, citing anonymous student witnesses, described his vacant stares and hesitation in combat. Loki wasn't just attacking Izuku directly. He was eroding the public's trust in him before he even had a chance to earn it. He was poisoning the well. All might recognize the signs immediately. He had seen heroes crumble under the weight of psychological warfare before. He found Izuku late one night in the gym, punishing himself, trying to outrun the ghosts in his head by pushing his body to its breaking point. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice gentle. Izuku didn't stop, continuing to pummel a reinforced punching bag. I have to be stronger, Izuku panted, his punches growing sloppier. Faster. If I'm fast enough, maybe the illusions can't keep up. This is not a foe you can outpunch, All Might said, stepping forward and placing a hand on the punching bag, stopping it cold. You cannot fight a shadow. This Loki, he feeds on your fear and your doubt. The more you fight him on his terms, the more powerful he becomes. Izuku finally stopped, his shoulders slumping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then what do I do? How can I fight what might not even be there? All Might looked at his successor, his heart aching with empathy. You stop trying to trust your eyes, he said, his voice imbued with the wisdom of a long and difficult life, and you start trusting your heart. The heart that Mjolnir found worthy. It will not lie to you. He gestured for Izuku to sit. This enemy is trying to isolate you, to make you feel like you're alone in a world of lies. But you are not alone. You have friends who believe in you. You have teachers who support you. Trust them. Trust their perceptions when yours are compromised. A hero's greatest strength is not his quirk, it is his team. He continued, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. I faced villains who use fear as a weapon. They would create illusions of cities falling, of people I couldn't save. For a time, it nearly broke me. I was so afraid of failure that I almost failed to act. It was only when I remembered that the symbol of peace was not just about winning, but about inspiring others to stand with me, that I found my strength again. Trust your instincts, my boy. Trust your friends. And trust the truth of your own spirit. The words were a balm on Izuku's frayed nerves. He had been trying to shoulder this new burden alone, just as he had with One for All. He had been trying to be the solitary pillar. But All Might was right. He wasn't alone. The very next day, the final test of Loki's initial campaign began. Izuku was on a scheduled patrol in a downtown shopping district with Todoroki. It was a mundane assignment, mostly involving giving directions and posing for selfies with civilians. Suddenly, an alarm blared from a nearby bank. They saw a figure burst out, carrying bags of money. The villain was unremarkable, dressed in a simple black jumpsuit and a ski mask. He was a cliché. As they gave chase, Izuku felt that familiar, cold prickle of doubt. Is this real? Or another illusion to make me look foolish? They cornered the man in an alleyway. He was cornered, with two of UA's brightest students blocking his only exit. He should have been terrified. Instead, he dropped the money bags, which landed with a soft, unreal poof. He turned to face them, and a slow, malicious grin spread across the part of his face visible under the mask. You're trying so hard, little hero, the villain said, his voice changing, morphing into that smooth, arrogant, all too familiar tone. Chasing shadows. Afraid of your own mind. Todoroki immediately sent a wave of eyes surging down the alley, but it passed through the villain's form harmlessly. It was another illusion. The figure's face shifted, the ski mask melting away to reveal Loki's smirking visage for a split second, a taunt just for Izuku. Your throne is built on lies, symbol of peace, the illusion said, its voice echoing in the confined space. You're a scared little boy playing with toys that aren't yours. Soon you'll be kneeling. And with that, the figure dissolved into a puff of green smoke, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and the lingering chill of his words. Todoroki looked at the empty alley, then at Izuku. His illusions are getting more brazen, he stated, his expression grim. He is no longer just testing you. He is mocking you. Izuku stood frozen for a moment, Loki's words echoing in his head. Your throne is built on lies. He felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly tempered by All Might's words from the night before. Trust your friends. Trust your heart. He looked at Todoroki. He's trying to make me doubt everything, Izuku said, his voice steadier than he felt. He wants me to be so scared of making a mistake that I stop acting at all. Then we will not let him, Todoroki replied simply. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Your eyes may be deceived. Mine may be as well, but together, our judgment is stronger. We will face this together. In that moment, Izuku realized the true nature of Loki's game. The illusions, the taunts, the media manipulation, they were all designed to do one thing: isolate him, to cut him off from the support system that was his greatest strength. Loki thought he was fighting a solitary hero. He was about to find out he was fighting Class 1A. Unseen, perched on a gargoyle atop a nearby skyscraper, the real Loki watched the two boys in the alley, a thoughtful, displeased frown on his face. The boy hadn't broken. He hadn't panicked. He had found his footing. He had leaned on his ally. Loki mused to himself, tapping a finger against his chin. More resilient than I anticipated. The direct approach is clearly not enough. It seems I will have to broaden the scope of my chaos. If I cannot break him by attacking him alone, perhaps I will break him by attacking everything around him. A cruel, brilliant idea began to form in his mind. An idea that involved not just illusions, but the very real and very destructive members of the League of Villains. It was time to stop playing games and start a war.